So, this week's excuse for the kitten noises is that little Anna got spayed yesterday and they must have put her on some intense drugs because she's been bouncing off the walls for about 20 hours now. So, today I want to talk about religion and spirituality because I think that when academics and activists talk about degrowth, the focus tends to be on the environment, on economics, democracy, social justice, things like that. And we tend to neglect the spiritual side of degrowth, which I think really nicely responds to the crisis of meaning in contemporary society, if you will. Whether it's some kind of superiority complex by the liberal elite about religion or just people's natural reluctance to talk about personal things and wanting to keep that private, I don't claim to know, but I know that for me personally, overcoming my bias against religion and religious people is probably one of the biggest ones I have to consciously challenge myself of, even still. My grandparents on both sides of my family were religious, but neither of my parents were in particular, and Christianity was definitely kind of associated with rednecks or just generally people who believed in God were considered to be stupid because science and evidence-based facts were considered, peak intellectualism, and intellectualism is good, whatever. I think Christianity was also really strongly associated with conservatism when I was growing up, which was most definitely demonized in my very liberal-leaning community. And after 9/11, of course, religion was also talked a lot about as a major source of violence, which is not good PR. At some point, though, I guess I started to wonder, well, why are so many people religious if, all these negative things are being said about them? And I realized that religion and spirituality in general just makes a whole lot of sense. There's a reason why every single society throughout time and space has had some sort of religion and something that guided their morals and values, something that answered the questions that couldn't be answered, and something that tied the community together. But every year, the world becomes less religious, not just in, Western Europe and North America, but everywhere. Especially young people are more and more identifying as atheists, agnostic, or non-religious in some other way. Some like to argue that this secularization has occurred because we haven't been able to adapt it to the rapid advances of science and reconcile that. Others argue that it has more to do with academic elites seeking power and influence, and yet others argue that more recent waves of secularization, like 60s, 70s, have more to do with a rejection of societal conventions combined with waves of social justice activism. I personally think it might be more to do with globalization than any of those other things, but who really knows? Definitely not me. Sometimes, though, I ask myself how much of this rejection of spirituality and religion is an extension of toxic masculinity because there's this artificial dichotomy between science, which is cold, hard, objective fact, undeniable truth, and then there's religion, which is mushy, make-believe, fluffy, talk about your feelings stuff that men aren't supposed to do. And it's like, I hate to break it to you guys, but there's actually not really such thing as purely objective fact. Everything that we think we know is based upon what came before it and therefore inherently biased. Every day, science discovers something that disproves what was previously believed. So in some sense, belief in the scientific method is a lot like religion. For many scientists, it guides their values, it answers the big questions, and is the foundation of a community. Never mind the fact that, so if science isn't cold hard fact and, we really should accept some mushy, fluffy feelings, especially for men in our society, what is that artificial dichotomy really about? I guess I don't buy the argument that young people are abandoning the religions they were raised in simply out of rebellion. I don't think young people are any less spiritual than previous generations or have any weaker morals or values. I think they're just being grounded in different places that we may not necessarily recognize as religious or spiritual. When it comes to morals and values, there's a lot of statistics that show young people today are less likely to engage in physical violence, to drink excessively, to use hard drugs, or to have unprotected sex. So yeah, I think it's more that the options provided by organized religion these days just don't align with their values. They go out into the world seeking a new group to belong to, a new group that shares their values, whether that be in astrology or consumerism or commercialized eco-minimalism, or any other thing around which culture can be centered, celebrities, games, entertainment. And because, I can't resist a good anti-capitalism moment, Lord knows consumerism has done a great job of creating identities around what you purchase. And for some people, being non-religious is honestly as strong of an identity as being religious is for others. The thing that I think we don't consider when considering religion is that it's not just a belief in a certain god or gods or certain texts. It's community, it's identity, it's a means of finding a sense of purpose and a weekly routine. And it's not that young people don't want those things anymore, it's just that they're getting them from elsewhere. They find community online, they find identity in politics, they find a sense of purpose in their work, or at least they want to. I also don't think it's a coincidence that people in the blue zones tend to be religious. If you don't know what the blue zones are, you can check out my previous video about it, but basically they're the regions of the world in which people live the longest. And in all of those communities, religion fosters social engagement and meaningful connection, and scientists think that that's a big part of why people live so long, because they're just happier. Maybe soaring rates of mental illness these days have something to do with people's failure to find these things. Feeling lonely and isolated and without a sense of purpose or community in their lives. No wonder people are sad. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that secular government is a bad thing. I'm not saying science is bad. I'm definitely not saying we shouldn't be teaching science in schools. I'm not saying atheism is bad. I'm just saying that maybe it's time for us to talk more openly about religion and spirituality in all realms of society, and it's time to include that conversation in conversations about degrowth. And insofar as religion and spirituality are tools to think critically about our morals and values, they are super underrated amongst my generation. And when it comes to education, definitely we should be teaching science, but maybe we should also consider teaching religion, as many of them as possible. And most importantly, we should be teaching critical thinking. Teaching kids how to use all of these different schools of thought to solve problems. In a lot of practical use cases, science is probably going to be the most helpful. But when it comes to the really big challenges in life, relationships and friendships, family dynamics, making big life decisions like what school to go to and what career path to take, who to vote for, all those things might be much better informed by a well-rounded and critical understanding of spirituality, what that means for each person. As much as religion can be twisted to motivate horrible acts, I'm pretty sure most religions place pretty heavy emphasis on compassion. A lot emphasize giving back in different ways and are not huge fans of poverty. And yeah, when it comes to degrowth, I think a lot of the foundational principles of degrowth are echoed in a lot of religions, if you know where to look. Most religions emphasize some kind of environmentalism, whether that be direct or indirect action. Most religions emphasize community, days or times of rest from work. Those are all things that degrowth wants to incorporate back into our lives. I read one article comparing Taoism and degrowth and found that pretty interesting, because they both, in a very similar way, ask society to align our actions with nature through a kind of simplified living. And whether you call that anti-consumerism, minimalism, simple living, whatever, it's more than just an act. It's rebelling against this very ingrained norm that we need to acquire more things to achieve greater status, to feel good about ourselves. Religion and the sense of purpose, community, and faith that it provides fills that need to feel good about ourselves without needing to buy a single thing. I'll link that article below if you're interested. At the end of the day, degrowth is not just about pausing the status quo economic growth, but taking time ourselves to pause and recognize the joy and beauty in things that are not consumption, in the stars and in nature and in each other and in ourselves. And that's not a religion in and of itself, but I definitely would say that's some kind of spirituality. The modern rejection of religion, especially within this kind of upper middle class educated elite, as something frivolous, based in unscientific fact, and it's fluffy and superfluous, I think really massively misunderstands the ultimate purpose of religion and undervalues how much spirituality actually influences our physical well-being. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking about lately. Why is society rejecting religion? What do we lose when we reject religion? And how does that affect academia? How does that affect our day-to-day lives, our mental health, and our communities? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely would love to know what other people are thinking about this. So, like, comment, subscribe. I do have a Patreon if you feel like supporting me, if you can support me. I'm much more busy these days, so I don't have a lot of time to do this. And that would really help me justify it, to be honest. So, cool. Bye.